Good morning and welcome to part 3 of our 4-part series, Moving Beyond Recovery. Today is an exciting topic, really looking at turning supply chain challenges into opportunities. This is probably one of the #1 area, if you look back over the past several years and looking forward, that has truly been impacted. You look at it from, speed to market, the amount of digital transformation that's taken place, warehousing, digital logistics, unbelievable. But also, we're going to have a really fun-filled panel discussion around what does the Biden administration, how does that going to impact supply chain versus the Trump administration? So today we have what I call our dream team on with us. These are our rock stars. These are our team that leads our consulting practice at UHY. We're just very fortunate that they're not usually traveling all over the world right now. So first, I'd like to welcome Cindy Hannafy. She is our managing director and leads our consulting transformation services group. And also she leads our solutions relating to program and project management, digital transformation as discussed, operational excellence. She has a bachelor's degree from the University of South Florida and also a master's degree. Cindy is currently active on our board of directors. Stephen Lanthrop is a principal in a service line of our portfolio and project management. Stephen has over 20 years of experience with project management, change management, process improvement, and strategy. Stephen has a bachelor's degree and master's in civil engineering from Georgia Institute of Technology. Corey, welcome Corey McNeely, is a principal in our service line division of digital transformation also. Corey has over 20 years of experience in process improvement, loss prevention, risk management, cost forecasting, business analysis with manufacturing. Corey has a bachelor's degree in business from Cal State and a master's degree from Michigan State. Michael Hyman is a principal in our service line. Michael is a black belt in Six Sigma and design for Six Sigma. He has over 20 years of process improvement and digital transformation experience. And Michael has a bachelor's degree, science and chemistry, and master's of business from Georgia State University. I probably didn't do that complete justice. We have a really talented team here. So we're very excited to have everybody. Thank you for joining. And before I forget, because I've been forgetting, is make sure you ask questions. The questions toolbar is to your right. We will be monitoring those throughout. If we can answer them during, we will. Or we will answer those at the end during our Q&A question and answer session. So I'm going to turn this over and change the presenter to Cindy, and welcome.
Okay. Let's see. All right. Hopefully everyone can see my screen.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Again, my name is Cindy Hannafy. I'm a managing director in our Transformation Solutions group of UHY Consulting. And as Tom let us know, we have our key leaders, Stephen Lathrop, Michael Hellman, and Corey McNeely with us today. And we're going to be talking about turning supply chain challenges into opportunities. We hear the words Trump's America First. We hear Biden's words made in all of America. It sounds like they're alike. It sounds so similar, but the policies and the strategy behind each are very unique and will create different challenges within your supply chain. And with challenges come change, and with change come great opportunity to innovate. And so we're here to talk to you about that today. But before we get started, I would like to share with you the intent of our session today. Our intention is to discuss the U.S. supply chain opportunities that potentially exist. under each candidate's platform. It is not our intent to promote one candidate over the other. We just want to objectively and as fairly as possible present to you the opportunities and risks as we see it. So we've decided, as any good panelist would do, 3 topics of discussion today. One is around environment and energy, really important. Taxes, tariffs, and trade, oh my, and manufacturing repatriation. So let's get started. We're going to start today, first off, with environment and energy, which is Stephen Lathrop's group. So Stephen, Biden's environmental platform is based on the Green New Deal, or also being said renewable energy. It seems to be a little bit more of a highly regulatory approach to addressing greenhouse gases and conservation and so forth. President Trump, on the other hand, seems to be a little, can be characterized as a little less regulatory, and he is promoting balancing our economy and our growth with the needs of our environment and so forth. So with that, can you help us unpack your thoughts on these 2 different camps to energy and the environment?
I would, yeah, thank you, Cindy, appreciate it. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining. I'd like to start with climate. And in my opinion, I don't think you're going to find any area that is more diametrically opposed between the 2 candidates. Fundamentally, in the Biden camp, there is a belief that climate change is man-made and presents a current and existential threat to our planet and to our civilization, period. That thought and that belief drives a number of policies. On the Trump side, Trump has never denied that climate change is happening. He has stated there is uncertainty in the data as to whether it is actually man-made. And that drives a number of policy points from the Trump administration. Those 2 thoughts are completely different sides of the equation. On the Biden side, because there is a belief that this is an existential threat, Biden is proposing a massive overhaul to how we deal with climate change that really goes to how we're producing energy, how we're going to regulate our environment, and how this is going to affect all of us in terms of costs, impacts in our daily lives. Biden has a sweeping plan that he's really calling a clean energy revolution. And I would agree with those words. It is revolutionary in its scope. $1.7 trillion is proposed in spending over the course of the next 10 years. Just to put that into context, that's a spending rate of nearly $500 million per day for 10 years. That is a lot of spending. What does that mean for us? Taxes. Obviously, taxes will go up. I don't want to steal Corey's thunder in terms of what that means, how we're going to do the taxes. I'll let Corey address that. The funding around this is going to be a very large deal. The changes are broad. Underpinning all of it is really how we're going to produce energy. Biden would like to get us away from fossil fuels. Oil, gas, wants to move away from that, looking to move the United States into 2 positions. One, carbon neutral. And what does that mean? Very quickly, we keep hearing that word. Just carbon neutral means the amount of emissions that you make are not greater than the amount of carbon that you're sinking. So you can actually suck carbon up into carbon sequestration, you can emit carbon. The balance of that equation by 2050, Biden's goal is we're 0. There's many ways to accomplish that. That's a very, very, very large transition. In the next 10 years, he wants to really set up an entire new green economy so that those goals are achievable. On the other side, for Trump, because the tenet and belief is there is uncertainty in the data as to whether climate change is truly caused by man, his position is we should not be investing $1.7 trillion into revolutionizing how we produce energy. our energy production should be from the United States. We actually have substantial oil and gas deposits, and we should become energy independent. What is the result of that? The result is cheap energy. What does cheap energy mean? Transportation costs in your supply chain, cheap fuel. All of these things trickle through the supply chain. So Trump's position is we're not going to invest in trying to reduce carbon if we don't believe it's man-made. So Trump on his side actually withdrew from the Paris Climate Agreement. Sort of an interesting tidbit. That actually goes into full effect the day after the election. So if you're not aware, we're not officially withdrawn yet. That will take place one day after the election. Biden has promised on day one, if he is elected, he will rejoin the Paris Agreement. That has global implications and obligations for the United States to meet around climate. Those are the very large, broad policy around climate. But I would like to then pivot, Cindy, to the next slide, which is energy. Because under climate, how we're regulating climate, how we're producing greenhouse gases, all of this is underpinned by energy. And I've got a couple of graphs here that are interesting to take a look at. We really did, on the graph in the bottom left, we hit peak coal around 2006. Coal has been on the decline. That was obviously well before Trump was elected. But even with Trump being elected 4 years ago, coal is still on the decline. You can see renewables have been increasing. And there's been a general trend, regardless of the candidate, moving towards renewables for quite some time. The graph on the right, I do find very interesting. There's a fact that's out there in terms of the United States producing carbon emissions that over the last 5-6 years, we've actually drastically reduced our carbon emissions. That is true, and that's a great thing. I don't think anyone would argue with that. How have we accomplished that? It's because of the graph on the left. We really have been reducing coal. Coal is a dirtier energy source. The graph on the right shows in the red line our net imports and exports are resulted in the red line on natural gas. And what it shows is the United States is a net exporter of natural gas, and that really happened under the Trump administration. Natural gas is a cleaner fuel. It's become very cheap. That's had a wonderful impact on business. Our energy costs are cheaper. That's great. Trump has done a lot around regulations, which I'd like to pivot to in the next slide as well. He made a pledge coming into his administration that we're going to reduce some of the bureaucratic obstacles to business, and he has held to that promise. Trump has rolled back 78 EPA regulations. The largest impacts of those regulations have been around methane emissions, regulations that impact oil and gas production, mining, have all come into play. And the idea for Trump is the regulations should not impede our business. We should be energy independent. And this is tied directly to our security for the United States, that we're not reliant on other countries, China, Iraq, Iran, other oil producing countries that don't have our best interest in mind. He's been taking that back in. Biden, on the other hand, has pledged that he will reverse these regulations come his administration. He will, under the clean energy revolution, not only undo the rollbacks, but go further in terms of oil and gas. There is a very strong push from the Biden administration to stop producing energy under oil and gas. Well, how are we going to produce it? Renewables, for sure, primarily solar and wind. Interesting article that came out actually just yesterday. Solar has now become the cheapest energy to produce, cheaper than oil and gas, actually. So there is a general trend moving towards renewables. Trump has not stated that he is against solar or wind. He is for energy independence. So Biden believes in that as well, but does also believe we must fundamentally move away from fossil fuels, that this is a risk, that there are dangers that will impact our economy, national threats, costs in terms of mitigating threats such as hurricanes, fires, and that belief is moving all the way through his policies. So at a very high level, what does this mean for us? Change. If Biden were to get elected, massive change, not unlike what we've gone through with COVID, right? How we do business will fundamentally shift. If there are companies that can adapt to those changes and adapt quickly, there are opportunities. What kind of opportunities? Get on top of what your emissions might be in your supply chain, whether it's through your vendors or if you are a supplier to another company. There will be requirements if Biden is to be elected that will require you to report on your emissions, especially through publicly traded companies. If you can get ahead of that, should Biden be elected, and understand your footprint, baseline yourself right now, and then work to show reductions, that could actually be a strength, because that's going to be a selection criteria under federal acquisition regulations, FAR, in terms of decision making around what you emit. So that's an opportunity. If you have any ability to manufacture towards green infrastructure, in particular wind and solar, whether it's supplying parts, promoting that, working in that industry, taking what you're doing today and to shift towards that, there's tremendous growth that is projected to occur. That's an opportunity. For Trump, it's a little bit more business as usual. Energy is going to be cheap. The regulatory environment will be less impactful. You'll have more freedoms in terms of the regulations, which allows you to make your own choices in terms of how you're going to conduct your business. So this one topic alone has massive implications that roll down through their policies and how it's going to play out.
So question for you, Stephen.
Yes.
So how feasible is the scale, obviously the scale of Biden's conversion over, so what, about a 10-year period?
1.7 trillion in 10 years.
Yes, 1.7 trillion in 10 years. How feasible is the scale of his plan given that price tag?
Yeah, I would say that's the $1.7 trillion question. The scale, if you actually go through and read everything that he is promoting, there's elements in there in terms of retrofitting and putting regulations in all new building structures. He is promoting high-speed rail for the entire country, fuel efficiency standards, not only reversing what Trump has rolled back, but going further. The scale and breadth of what he is proposing, in my opinion, is not going to be accomplished with 1.7 trillion. And how can I say that? Under even Biden's website, if you're to go and read it, he is saying that in addition to the 1.7 trillion, there needs to be an additional $3.3 trillion to be spent by the private sector, state, and local governments in order to make this happen. That's $5 trillion. It is very far reaching. I would say it's a bit of a smorgasbord at this point. It's very ambitious. What is actually going to be completed, time will tell should he be elected.
What's the consequence of the U.S. not being in a global leadership position with the Paris Agreement for the green infrastructure? What's the implication of us not playing?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. China's President Xi Jinping has come out, I think it was just September 22nd of this year, and made very ambitious goals about becoming carbon neutral inside of China. So why would he do that? China right now dominates 70% of the solar market. And there are 189 countries that have signed the Paris Climate Agreement. Even if the United States, should Trump be elected, continue with oil and gas production, That's great on a domestic basis. On a global scale and global trade, there is a very strong buy-in, whether we agree with it or not in the United States is irrelevant. There's a very strong global buy-in to climate change and to reducing greenhouse gases. China is seeing this as an opportunity to become the leaders in green manufacturing, to change their economy and to start producing wind, solar, hydroelectric, geothermal, other types of energy production, green manufacturing jobs and expertise to seize on that new economy. If we fall behind and we're complacent inside the United States, there's an opportunity missed for what is a global change in energy production and manufacturing. So that's an opportunity that could be missed if we lose sight of the global impacts.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Stephen. We appreciate that. All right, now we're going to move on to talking a little bit of transitioning into taxes, tariffs, and trade. And Corey is going to help us out with this one. So, Corey, according to the Tax Foundation, the Biden camp is proposing a variety of tax increases on corporations as well as individuals. And there are a few tax credits for companies onshoring their business, and there's also increases in taxes on foreign profits. On the flip side, as we heard last night during the debates as well, Trump is favoring more tax cuts, more tax credits, with increases coming from trade tariffs. Corey, can you help us make sense of all of the impacts of the taxes, the tariffs, the trade issues on our U.S. supply chain?
Absolutely, and thank you, everyone, for joining us. Similar to Stephen's position, Trump and Biden stand diametrically different on these positions. With the Green New Deal, there is significant requirements for taxation to generate the funds necessary to build this infrastructure that Stephen has mentioned. Under the Biden's proposal, currently, they would like to roll back the tax cuts associated with Trump's administration. And with that being said, that dramatically changes some of the competitiveness that we have compared to the current administration. If you take a look at that very first graph that I have there, currently, under the changes, our tax structure is at 21% for corporations. Previously, it was at 35%. A return back to 35% would put us at the highest corporate taxation rate with our international trading blocks. So that would put us at somewhat of a disadvantage. However, those tax funds would be utilized to build an infrastructure that we could be capitalized on in the future. One of the things that both campaigns have promised is they've talked about tax incentives on having people onshore manufacturing. When you dig deep into the Biden platform and the documents that are on the website, there are some caveats associated with that. The onshoring of manufacturing under the Biden plan is heavily favored, and tax credits are heavily favored for green initiatives and eco-friendly organizations. Whereas underneath the Trump administration, it is in general all manufacturing. Now, both have a similarity of giving some incentives associated with critical infrastructure, national defense, and medical supplies. However, there are differences that take place. When you start to take a look at the actual tax plan and peel it back a little bit, you'll notice that taxes not only on the income rates would go up underneath the Biden plan, but you would also see those rates go up under capital gains, the small business tax. Across the board, all taxation would be going up to support this required investment for green technologies. To put it into perspective on how it impacts individuals, if you look at the chart on the very right-hand side, you will see the tax basis of how it impacts individuals in the various quintiles. You'll notice at the very far right, there is an astronomical difference on the top earners under the Biden administration compared to the Trump administration. And he has made no bones about it that the higher income individuals would be funding these plans. In some instances, this funding taxation can reach up to 62% in certain areas, considering state and local taxes. Whereas under Trump, the approach is, let's reduce taxes. Let's have a trickle-down effect. The reduction in taxes will allow innovation and reinvestment of the money. One of the things that Trump did to encourage repatriation of manufacturing is that he allowed companies to bring back surplus cash and equipment at reduced rates after the tax cuts went through last time. It's estimated that $2.6 trillion of capital moved back on shore after that bill was passed. Overall, the taxes, as said, are extremely different, but they have different purposes. One is not going to build the national infrastructure. One is going to go and build the manufacturing aspect of all the products in America. Trump's belief is that we should capitalize on our natural resources and what we have existing and bring more business back regardless of what that is. Additionally, there are some things when we get into trade that we'll talk about that are dramatically different that favors manufacturing in North America, not just the U.S. from a taxation standpoint. Can we pivot to the next slide? Sorry.
Yes.
So as mentioned, there are some differences in trade and tariffs. One similarity is both Biden and Trump believe that we should utilize tariffs against other countries that are competing unfairly. However, the difference there is that Biden believes that we should do it as a World Trade Organization initiative, whereas Trump believes that we should just be able to do that from an executive standpoint. And as we've seen since 2018, Trump has started to levy severe tariffs across the board. Oftentimes, people mistake that tariffs will impact pricing across the board in certain areas, and it affects the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, of products that are available in the United States. As you can see in this graph that I have here, you'll notice that once the tariffs started getting implemented, the actual CPI started to decrease in general. There are some areas that increased, but the decrease in general was due to the fact that onshoring and production of products started to take place in the United States. So there was a turnaround time for the production to negate the fact that the costs of raw materials were going up, simply due to the fact that you had to create the raw materials. On the Biden aspect, he believes that on the trade, we need to make sure that trade is not only fair and balanced from a domestic gross product standpoint, but also from an ethical eco standpoint. And within some of his trade policies, he would like to implement trade credits called carbon fees on products that are carbon intensive or countries that don't comply with green initiatives. Essentially, that would become a tariff. The details behind that are not entirely clear in the platform, but it is clear that countries that compete in a less eco-friendly way would receive some type of tariff on the product that's coming in, even though it's called a credit fee. When we take a look at what's gone on historically in the last 12 months, you will see that the Consumer Price Index has changed dramatically in certain key segments. Now with COVID, certain things obviously skew these numbers. As you can see at the very bottom, airfare has dropped dramatically. And then you also see used cars has skyrocketed because people don't want to invest as much. But what's interesting is that if you take out our two outliers, our CPI is actually only 0.75. So it's one of the lower CPIs that have taken place over the years. That kind of goes to show you that some of these trade and price things normalize on their own in a rolling pattern. Obviously, some months it's going to be higher, other months are going to be lower. Coincidentally, at the same time when heavy tariffs were being levied against China for steel dumping, we saw our trade deficit with China contract. It actually started shrinking because there was an offset and augmentation of agricultural purchases. and that contraction was $1.7 billion in just 1 month. So the net effect of that tariff, while it impacted the steel industry and the raw materials, definitely benefited our agricultural industries. Can we go to the next slide, please? Now, with that all being said, trade, taxes, it all impacts employment, the potential employment. And under the current plans, there are some major differences. One similarity is both plans are promising to create 10 million jobs in the next year. Under Biden's administration, these jobs are primarily focused in the green industry, manufacturing in the green industry, renewable energy. Versus in the Trump administration, they're focusing on job growth, period. They don't care what the industry is. They want to be able to stimulate small business. They want to be able to stimulate services, restaurants, things of that nature. The key in these plans that's interesting is that Biden would like to increase the minimum wage to $15, whereas Trump wants to leave that up to the states. As anybody that watched the debate last night heard his argument in regards to the states being able to dictate the pricing. And I think that would have a dramatic impact on manufacturing and where you locate your production facilities based off the cost of living. Interestingly enough, if you see the two graphs down below, the median household income since 2014 has gone up. The trend started under the Obama administration. There was a slight hiccup, like in all administrations, but you can see over the last 10 years for both platforms, both under the Obama and the Trump, earnings have gone up. Earnings have gone up simply due to the production has gone up. We've had more production capabilities. We have more work available. And right now, before pre-COVID, we were at the lowest unemployment, and we had 74% of the workforce actually being utilized. These trends, if you got rid of a virus, I think are going to be quite similar for each platform. The difference that's going to be there is the cost associated with manufacturing. So it gives you some opportunities to start taking a look. First and foremost, under the Biden plan, there's going to be a heavy emphasis on unionization. So as you start planning your business structure and setup and expansion, you want to keep that in mind that regulation is going to expand a little bit. And if you come up with stout compliance departments and processes in place, you'll be ahead of the game before anybody else gets there. Under the Trump plan, it's basically business as normal. We do know that there's a reduction in taxation that he wants to place, and there's also some incentives on hiring disenfranchised workers right now, simply due to the coronavirus. Organizations that plan for either or can implement these plans because they're simply one is dialed up in one direction from a cost standpoint from labor cost, while the other is not. And you can utilize the same plans to be able to capitalize on expansion of your organization.
Great. A couple of questions for you. You talked a little bit about the standard corporate rate and the business taxes and how they vary under each of the plans. Talk a little bit about the payroll tax piece of that and the Social Security tax just for a second. How is that going to impact the individual?
Well, as the individual, they are going to have an impact. Based off various studies, you can see the impact going anywhere from 2 to 18%. It all depends on which think tank you look at. The payroll tax, depending on the plan and depending on what actually takes place, can dramatically change under a Biden administration that they want to get rid of the taxation, basically pre-tax status of 401k deductions, which would thus increase your taxable earnings at the end of the year. If that takes place, you could actually see that going from the 2% to almost to 12%. And as we know, as employees start to get taxed heavier, the spending goes down. Discretionary spending goes down, and that impacts the balance of everything that we've already talked about.
Interesting. little bit back to labor. We talked about both camps saying that they're going to be producing 10 million new jobs each year. First of all, do you think that's achievable? Because even before COVID hit, our unemployment rate was the lowest it's ever been in, I can't tell, since, you know, whenever. So probably I was born. So, but with that said, we didn't have the skilled labor then. A lot of my manufacturing clients were having a hard time finding skilled labor back then. What's going to be different now?
So, to your point, our unemployment was the lowest since 1954, which makes it very difficult to compete. And we
So
did
it was before I was born.
3.1, I believe, but don't quote me on that. We did have a gap. I mean, let's look at pre-coronavirus. The unemployment was so low, it was very difficult to find qualified individuals. And under both plans, they want to expand the capability of incentivizing employers to be able to educate and train their own employees. They want to be able to give some different types of training opportunities, but they're segmented slightly different. One under the Biden camp is more green leaning. Under the Trump plan, it's more skilled labor, advanced manufacturing. In addition to that, there are also some differences in regards to work visas. Currently, under the Biden proposal, they'd like to triple the available work visas, whereas Trump only would like to expand the work visas for skilled labor to fill in some of the gaps on the advanced manufacturing side. So there are some opportunities there from an employment standpoint. And right now, I mean, the market has significant amount of individuals waiting to get back to work. But if you were to get back to pre-COVID levels and add another 10 million jobs, we would have a very difficult time filling those positions, regardless of which political party is in power. It's very difficult.
And from that challenge, opportunities are created.
Absolutely. You have multiple opportunities to be able to create, mold, and develop new employment workforce that is specialized in your processes by doing internal education and development programs.
Great. Thank you, Corey.
Yes.
And next up, Michael Heilman. Dr. Heilman, Biden's key manufacturing tenant is obviously, we've been talking about the Green New Deal, and it's at the center of everything. It's the center of new jobs. It's the center of new regulations, taxes, and so on. Trump's key manufacturing tenant is the American First economy, which we've been talking about. Both campaigns have released plans to spur manufacturing in the U.S. I'd love to hear your perspective on the key differences between the candidates and what you expect might happen.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. The one thing is really looking through the various plans that have been disseminated out there. There's a lot of similarities between them, but there are some key differences. And it really comes down to the overall government approach to these plans, the investments and where government is investing taxpayer money, and really the people side of this when it comes to the labor force. Biden's manufacturing plan is really underpinned, as what's been heard here, by the green initiatives and the government's role to transition out of the oil and gas industry into more of the renewable energy industry. Trump's strategy is much more of America taking a leadership in the advanced manufacturing capabilities, right? Really looking at how to bring technology and stuff to the manufacturing process. And that's really it. And also the other thing is too, is that what I found interesting is that the advanced manufacturing plan by Trump really reads as a corporate strategy document. It really outlines a vision of what that advanced manufacturing is. It has what I would say is at least articulated goals around that vision, and it's got set defined objectives for each of those goals. And they've really gone down to the level of making sure that there's an accountability structure across the different federal agencies for those objectives. So it much like Trump emphasized last evening, more of a corporate business person versus a politician. And the strategy document to me reflects that. And that's just some of the key differences between the two as far as how they're approaching this. The other thing, as I mentioned, is investments. Obviously, the Biden plan is heavy on investing and shifting the alliance from fossil fuels to electric vehicles and more of those renewable energy investments, really kind of shifting industry from one source of energy to others. Whereas the Trump plan is really focused, as I mentioned before, is on the advanced manufacturing capabilities, looking at robotics, looking at other ways to make the manufacturing process more efficient, not changing the energy that's being used, but making sure that the energy is being used more effectively and more efficiently within the processes themselves. And then the last is the people. And to me, this is the one that is the most significant. The Biden plan really outlines, and as you see there within the slide, being pro-worker, but being pro-worker from a standpoint of taxing or penalizing companies and corporations that are not basically hiring American workers, being more pro-union in the mere fact of making it easier for employees to unionize and stuff within the manufacturing sector. The interesting piece as far as the Trump plan is that it really focuses on the workforce of tomorrow and really focuses on government's role in, as you guys were just articulating, what are those skills and where do we have those skill gaps and where does the government need to play a role in facilitating kind of a career education pathways, establishing apprenticeship programs, and really helping employers find and match the skills they need to the available skills and resources that are out there. So they're both trying to create jobs, but it's just the stark difference of kind of how to approach that end goal.
While you're on this topic, quick observation. We talk about advanced manufacturing. I'm hearing more about lights out facilities. I'm hearing a lot more and more about innovation with artificial intelligence and robotics in the manufacturing process. I would consider this definitely an opportunity to explore under either camp.
Absolutely. The difference is really going to be how quickly some of those advances in technology take place, or basically, is there going to be a fundamental energy shift and focus within the U.S. manufacturing sector? But in any cases, having that shift in energy is going to present a challenge. The opportunity is that if your business is already aligning towards that or moving towards that, that will be an opportunity to exploit that further. When it comes to the robotics and automation piece, it's really going to come back to understanding your operational efficiencies and really how are you addressing where you have inefficiencies in your processes today. And I think as far as the next slide, we get into a little bit more as far as where the labor force is kind of going here. Actually, the next one, just out of sequence there. And this is where Corey kind of touched upon this a little bit. Over the last 3 years, we've seen something that we haven't seen for decades. We were suddenly experiencing low unemployment and suddenly having more jobs available than people willing or actively seeking a job. And so we had a shortage in the market. For anyone that follows Mike Rowe has been on this from a campaign perspective for a number of years, following his dirty jobs career and working through those trade aspects, and really has been a promoter of more trade skill education. And the last 3 years have just exploited that gap even further. The other interesting piece is that the U.S. is especially experiencing something right now from a generation perspective. As it is right now, the baby boomers that were in that 1946 to 1964 group are hitting retirement age at 10,000 people a day. Now, a lot of that generation is staying longer in the workforce than in previous generations, but it's still a matter of almost 6,000 individuals exiting the workforce voluntarily every single day. So we've got a skills gap and we've got a retiring workforce that's going to create a larger unfulfilled labor market. And by both camps promising new jobs coming back, it's only going to make that gap bigger and wider to fill. And so the opportunity there is to lean out a lot of those processes, bring in automation, bring in artificial intelligence to be able to run and operate your manufacturing facilities at the output levels that are required.
Interesting.
To just add to your point, Michael, in terms of leaning out your processes and working to change how you do that, should Biden be elected, part of the $1.7 trillion there is making money available, $400 billion available for research and developments around green infrastructure, monies that could be available via tax incentives, or additional monies around leaning out your processes when you can demonstrate energy reduction, greenhouse gas emissions. So that plays into and feeds into what you just said as well.
Yeah. Now, the one thing too, around the investment and around the Buy America piece, if you back up one slide there, Cindy, and this is just from a trying to follow the numbers standpoint. Biden has proposed $400 billion in kind of Buy American spend from a procurement standpoint. But the math is a little bit fuzzy as to what that necessarily means. And the reason that I say that is that there's been studies as far as the federal discretionary spend, which one today is just under $1.4 trillion. So between the $400 billion of procurement directed spend to Buy America and the $300 billion of investment, that's nearly half of the federal government's discretionary spend as it stands today. So it's a little bit unclear. Is that a one-time spend? Is that a cumulative spend? What's the time frame? What's the horizon on that $700 billion? It's unclear within the plan what that exactly means. Now, within the overall discretionary budgetary analysis that's done, and this was by the Government Accountability Office, the foreign in product obligations of the federal government was only at 7.8 billion. So now that is all in how you define foreign spend. And there's a number of alternative ways to do that. One is you can define the foreign-owned firm location, the foreign ownership of a company, where the end product is actually produced, or any type of co-ownership type of situation. But as far as true end products coming abroad and being imported for government spending purposes, it's only at the 7.8 billion. So again, the 400 billion is a little bit unknown what that is going to do. If it's redirecting spend, if it's creating new spend, it's just a little bit unclear. The one though impact though is that buying America is restricting competitiveness, right? At its very nature, you're kind of cutting out certain global markets in preference for an American market. And it makes a lot of sense. But conversely, there's also a cost associated with that. And it's been estimated that the shift of handicapping foreign companies, meaning that their price comparisons are at a percentage higher when compared to US bids for government contracts. That cost difference is essentially about a 5.6% markup to the federal government, which according to their discretionary spend in these areas equates to about $94 billion in extra cost to the taxpayers for equivalent products and equivalent services.
Just out of curiosity, does this also include products that we would consider critical to our supply chain as well? Because I know there's been a lot of focus around our dependency on our critical supply chain on foreign soils. Talk to me a little bit about that, and where we're going with that critical supply chain.
Yeah, so as we've seen this year with the coronavirus, a lot of our medical supplies, a lot of our pharmaceutical drugs are actually produced overseas and imported into the US. That's where some of that $7.8 billion of government spend comes from, is purchasing those materials and bringing them into country. And there's a heavy focus right now, especially given the experiences this year with China and other countries, to pull that manufacturing more back in-house and have it within our borders and control of that part of the supply chain. And it's definitely going to present opportunities for companies. We're seeing certain corporate entities, and I'll leave some names out of it right now, that where they have really kind of run the course of what they have done for years. And now they're taking certain opportunities to really kind of reinvent or reinvigorate their company by focusing on pharmaceutical stocks or on medical supply manufacturing.
Well, along with any good supply chain comes a strategy of balancing that portfolio. So bringing some back to the U.S. while still buying some from foreign soils would kind of balance out, our risk across the board. Do you see any of that happening, or is it under the Trump administration, or is it strictly he wants to bring everything back here to the U.S.?
I don't know that either one of them would say all of it has to come back, because there is a certain amount of global supply, global risk. The other interesting piece is, and a lot of these don't really incorporate into their messaging, is that we have a number of trade agreements with different countries. And in some cases, there are obligations under those trade agreements that have to be met. So part of it is a little bit of what's being said, part of it is a little bit of execution behind the scenes and what actually can be done while still meeting those agreements. Obviously the new North America trade agreement is to go in full effect later this year. We also have trade agreements with a lot of the European partners and stuff out there. So to say all of it's coming back, I think, is a bit of a misnomer by both camps, to indicate that at all.
Great. Well, we have about 7 minutes left, so I would love to take an opportunity for the team to really talk about, to summarize up a few opportunities and what you think the offsetting risks are in each of these three categories. So, Stephen, you want to start with you?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you, Cindy. There are a number of opportunities and risk, and under both candidates. If Biden should be elected, let's start with the risks. If Biden should be elected, there's going to be, per his statements and per his green energy revolution, a massive change in the way we produce energy, which underpins everything in the economy, literally everything that we do. And that change brings about consequences, both good and bad. In terms of the risks, it's going to be another change even after following COVID. It's continual change that's going to be very difficult to get your arms around very quickly. There is an ambitious schedule to this. So something to be aware of in terms of risk is you cannot relax even after coming out of COVID and adapting the way we've all had to adapt. You have to continue with that mentality of change and being adaptive in nature. That can be sometimes exhausting, especially to your staff, especially to people doing work. That's going to be a cultural and a change management issue to keep that motivation going. Regulations. There will be more regulations to comply with. Think about getting ahead of that as best you can. Anytime you have to fill out paperwork, you have to look at what you're doing, fill out reports, there's a burden that requires administrative help, or that you're outsourcing that to a consultant. That requires time and money. And some of these changes, no doubt, are complex. They're big in scale and in scope, and there will be a lot of education and a lot of information that we have to absorb. On the opportunity side for Biden, there are a lot, because we are opening up new markets in terms of, by regulations, enforcing quotas around greenhouse gases, around renewable energies. So again, if you can position yourself to get into the renewable markets, whether that's a slight shift in what you're manufacturing, how you're manufacturing, measuring and baselining your own greenhouse gas footprints, that will be huge. Okay, that's a really big one. Let's talk Trump. And let's talk Trump in terms of risk. And we hit this one earlier. The risk is, if we become complacent in terms of greenhouse gases and climate change. There are 189 countries that have signed on board with the Paris Agreement. We have backed out. The rest of the world is moving forward, except for 7 countries. And I've got that listing. It's interesting who we're keeping company with. China is making statements that they're going to be a leader in this. That could be a missed opportunity for a new economy, right? In addition to just governments, let's take this down to company levels. Let's talk Walmart. Walmart has a project called the Gigaton Project, referencing 1 billion tons of gas, carbon equivalent emissions being reduced. Walmart is pushing very heavily on their supply chain that you must reduce your carbon footprint, that they have a goal. If you want to do business with Walmart, you are going to have to look at your own carbon footprint. Is Walmart the only one? Absolutely not. AT&T, GE, there are many others that are working very heavily outside of any government regulatory framework. So under the Trump administration, that is a risk. What are the advantages under a Trump administration? Cheap energy. It's business as usual. We're going to continue the policy of, if you want to implement a new EPA regulation, 2 have to come off. What does that have the net effect of? Less time, energy, and money in terms of complying with EPA regulations. So that's an advantage.
I think now that we see Tom Alungi's face, I think we're running out of time. We have about 2 minutes here.
You got a couple minutes, yeah.
Okay. Corey, real quick.
To echo what Stephen was saying, when you start taking a look at the Biden platform, there are opportunities specifically around R&D tax credits on the green initiatives. You have, some predictability going on with trade tariffs since they're going through the World Trade Organization versus an executive order. But also on the Trump side, you have these opportunities with reduced cost of raw materials for things of petroleum-based nature. I mean, it's not just fuel, it's anything that is petroleum-based. The costs are starting to drop dramatically because we're exploiting and utilizing all the natural resources possible. So I think that there is those 2 opportunities. Now, from a risk standpoint, there's a lot of unknown on the Biden side because we don't truly understand what the regulatory compliance is going to be. It's just a shell outline. I can't tell you if it's a $50,000 fine or a $500 fine associated with not being green. So there's some vagueness sitting there. On the Trump side, it echoes what Stephen said. The competitiveness outside in the international market when you're not going green diminishes. Also, we do have significant organizations that are requiring you to go green. illustrating Walmart, one of the biggest retailers, the biggest retailer in the world. If you want to do business with them, that you have to improve your carbon footprint. So either way, it is a good plan to try and be as green as possible and go in that direction just to be able to do business with those organizations and protect the environment. So it's actually not truly a giant risk. It's somewhat of a latent opportunity for you to take advantage of.
Great. All right, Michael, we're going to end with you. We've got one last question. What can or should manufacturers do right now, regardless of the next president?
I think, and if you want to show here, Cindy, I mean, to me, this boils down to what are you going to do from an investment standpoint? The horizon of that being short term, long term is all dependent on, who gets elected. But what can these manufacturers do right now is take a strong, hard look at their operations, because the labor situation is not going to change regardless of which president gets elected. And that's where really looking at how to lean out your organization, how to create that culture of continuous improvement in your organization, and really how to make that operational efficiency sustainable over the long term are the ones that are not only going to survive, but thrive basically going forward. And so this is where, UHY has an optimal performance management system that really helps drive that message home and create that culture within the organization. And of course, we're happy to talk to any of our clients and partners as far as opportunities there, because there is a risk. If you don't do this now, the market will pass you by at some point.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Michael. Tom, thanks for having us. We really appreciate it. Hope we addressed all the questions.
Thank you. Amazing, excellent discussion. Obviously, I think one thing's for sure, there's uncertainty, and with uncertainty, you need a real strong advisory team behind you to guide you through the unknown here. But again, thank you for everyone for joining us. And also, just one reminder, we have our last part is next Thursday at 12:30 is our part 4, more of a financial perspective on moving beyond recovery. So we really love to have you join us. And again, we want to thank everybody today and hope this was really insightful. So thank you, team, for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great rest of the day.